2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said stump. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm joining you live from Milwaukee. We're looking forward to Donald Trump's speech, which will come on the stage behind me later tonight. And all this going on at the same time, a speculation Biden just is not going to be the Democrat candidate. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Blenheim Palace today. The European political community are meeting. Is the new Labour government taking us closer back towards the European Union? And Liz Truss will join me, and we'll talk about her complaint about the King's speech, plus the Financial Conduct Authority saying that banks should not treat political figures so badly. Gosh, who knew? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that Sir Keir Starmer has announced £84 million worth of new funding to tackle illegal migration as he hosts an EU summit at Blenheim Palace today. The Prime Minister says he wants to reset the relationship with the continent and push for closer security ties with other countries. The groups agreed to boost defence capabilities in Ukraine as well as that country defends itself against Russia. And speaking at the end of the summit of European leaders, Sir Keir Starmer promised to grip Europe's migration crisis.
Stop illegal migration. We must also tackle it at source. So today I'm announcing £84 million of new funding for projects across Africa and the Middle East. That includes humanitarian and health support, skills training, help with job opportunities and access to education. This is a vital part of gripping the migration crisis. And it shows how we're going to do business on the world stage.
Well, the announcement of that initiative comes as one person died and 71 people had to be rescued after a migrant boat sank in the English Channel late last night. All those on board the vessel ended up in the water, but all except one were picked up in the joint rescue operation which was conducted between the UK and the French authorities. In other news, Sir Keir Starmer says today's report from the COVID inquiry confirms that the UK was unprepared for the coronavirus outbreak. In a 240-page assessment released this lunchtime, Baroness Hallett found there were significant and widespread failures from successive governments. The report also condemns the 2011 pandemic strategy for being virtually abandoned when COVID hit, with no forward focus on economic and social impacts. In other news today, 5 Just Stop Oil protesters, including one of its co-founders, were jailed today for conspiring to organise protests which blocked the M25, causing massive disruption for motorists back in 2022. Roger Hallam, Daniel Shaw, Louise Lancaster, Lucia Whitaker de Abreu and Cressida Gethin organised 45 protesters to climb onto gantries over the motorway for 4 successive days in November 22. Prosecutors allege the protest cost the Metropolitan Police more than £1 million and caused more than 50,000 hours of vehicle delays for drivers. Mr Hallam was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, while the remaining 4 defendants were each handed 4 years. The judge in the case said the 5 had crossed the line from concerned campaigners to fanatics. Now, in the United States, the Washington Post is reporting that Barack Obama has now told his allies that Joe Biden needs to reconsider his re-election bid. At the same time, as it's been confirmed, the president has had to cancel speeches because he has COVID. It's also being reported that Nancy Pelosi, a close aide of Joe Biden, has privately told him he can't win the November the 5th election, echoing a growing number of Democrats expressing the same doubts. Let me just bring you a bit of breaking news coming to us from France. We know security is tight there ahead of the Olympics, but a police officer has been injured in an attack, we're told, which has taken place in the city centre. That's according to the French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin. The attacker was reportedly shot by police in the area where the incident happened as it was being cordoned off. That just happened. A man has been shot in Paris. We'll bring you more on that story as we get it. In the meantime, let me tell you, those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst and I am back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. I'm joining you live from Milwaukee. You can hear music. Everyone's getting set. It's a fantastic big hall. The delegates from all the different states come. They vote. We listened to J.D. Vance speak last night, but tonight it's the big, big speech. The big Donald Trump speech. And of course, this comes after. How do we describe what happened on Saturday other than, frankly, a miracle? I don't know whether you believe in miracles or guardian angels, but something truly remarkable happened. You know, he turned his head at the last minute. The bullet went through the air. It was a complete and utter miracle. Now, many are saying, well, Nigel, why aren't you in Claxon? Why aren't you in the House of Commons? Well, you know what? When a friend of yours goes through a near-death experience, I think the least you can do is to come and show some respect and pay them a visit. And you know what? I know what a near-death experience is like, because 15 years ago, I was in that light aircraft, crashing to the ground. I thought my last seconds had come, and I was smashed to pieces and split sternum, broke all my ribs. I was in a bad way. And I know for the fortnight afterwards, I was very emotional. I couldn't quite work out why I was still alive. It was a very odd thing to go through. And I think, to be honest, what we saw yesterday here, Donald Trump sitting, listening to his son, listening to his granddaughter, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what kind of Donald Trump we get tonight on the stage, what kind of speech he gives. He says he's rewritten the speech himself. He's also indicated he wants to try to bring America together. Well, we'll see what happens. Now, not everybody gets this. I had the misfortune of running into Emily Maitlis yesterday from the News Agents podcast. This is how the exchange went.
And is that the sense you've got, that he's having a tough time right now?
He nearly died.
Do you think he's having a tough time right now?
He nearly died.
Well, I'm joined now by Dave Bossy. Dave is co-chair of this Republican National Convention. He is a veteran within the Republican movement, a good friend of Donald Trump's. Dave Bossy, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
What extraordinary circumstances.
You know, it is a miracle what happened on Saturday. If the president doesn't turn his head, he doesn't do that a lot. To be honest with you, he turned his head. He had angels on his shoulders, and that's really the only way to look at it. We were so close to having a memorial service this week instead of a convention, and it was shocking to me, having been to hundreds of rallies with him.
Yeah,
it was painful to watch for me to not be there with him. And so I've had a chance to now spend time with him this week. And he's a changed person, just like you were describing. You know, he realizes how close he came, a quarter of an inch. And so we're going to get to the investigation of how that happened. We're going to get to the investigation of the Secret Service and the director of the Secret Service and their coordination with the Biden White House. We'll get to that, but we'll get to that after we win in November. And so
I spoke to John Jr. today. I spoke to Eric, the other two sons today. And yeah, whilst they're mighty relieved their father's still alive, there is a simmering sense of great anger. I mean, this guy on the roof was only 130 yards away.
130 yards, and he was wandering around for an hour. They had him, there were people tracking him. We had police officers engage him. How is it possible that a sheriff's deputy engaged him and did nothing about it? How is it that the counter sniper teams on the roof and we're watching him, and it's the whole thing does not add up. We're going to get to it, but we're not going to get distracted by it. We'll get to it in the right time. But Donald Trump needs to win in November so that we can save this country and Western civilization.
Yeah, he's a very important figure. I agree. Now, on this stage, we're going to see him tonight. It'll be a big speech. It'll probably be a couple of hours. You said already you've been with him. I'm seeing him a bit later, that he is a bit of a changed man, and you're going to feel emotional after this. He's rewritten the speech himself. What are we going to hear, Dave Bossy?
You know, I think we're going to hear a lot about coming together and moving past it. We're going to hear about unity. We're going to hear a lot of those types of themes throughout the speech. However, he is going to draw a distinction between himself and 4 years of peace and prosperity, and that record that is not touched. It's really that Joe Biden destroyed our American economy. He destroyed our southern border. He destroyed everything that Donald Trump did. Single-handedly, he did it. The reality is, though, is that the left wants to now switch Joe Biden out. And so we have to come to the understanding that it's not just Joe Biden as an individual, it's the radical Biden agenda. And that's driven by that radical left. So no matter who they try to, if there comes to a point where they try to pivot, they can't move away from the radical left-wing agenda of the last 4 years that have destroyed our southern border, destroyed our economy, created an inflation monster, the Green New Scam, making America energy dependent on foreign countries. These are the big debates. And that's what we're going to hear about. We're going to hear about those issues.
And both sides will fight on that. I know that Donald Trump would rather Joe Biden was the candidate, but there's no chance now, is there?
Oh, I don't. I'm not a believer that there's never say never.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is the incumbent. Joe Biden is someone who is going to have to walk away from it. That I don't know how he is going to be capable of walking away from it. Number one. Number two is if he walks away from it, how are they not going to go to Kamala Harris? And then you have to have her walk away from it. And I don't think the first black woman vice president in American history is going to walk away from it that easy. And she's even more beatable than Joe Biden. If you find somebody less likable with lower polling numbers, with a worse job approval rating, than Joe Biden, it's Kamala Harris.
I'm going to get a Democrat voice on that in a moment, but for now, it's going to be fascinating tonight to see what Trump says. And well done for a very, very well-run convention.
Well, thank you very much.
So far,
it's an honor to have you here, and congratulations on your election.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, let's get a Democrat view on all of that. I'm joined by Nomiki Konst, U.S. political analyst, and she's not ready for us yet. I tell you what, we'll go to a break, we'll come back, and we'll get a Democrat response to what Dave Bossy just said.
Okay.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
King Charles has launched his own aftershave, costing, wait for it, an eye-watering 135 quid for a 100 millilitre bottle, promising buyers that they can smell just like the gardens of his Highgrove country pile. Now, this is something that Meghan Markle would do, surely not the King. Is this a case of King Charles selling out, watering down the brand, just like Meghan. Well, join me now to discuss this is the royal broadcaster, Helena Chard. Helena, welcome to the show.
Martin,
often on this
hi.
show, we've had a pop at Meghan Markle, the Sussexers, for selling out, for flogging strawberry jam, and now the King is flogging Pong. Is this really the right royal thing to do?
Do you know what? So the joy of luxury Highgrove splash. You know, at the end of the day, Highgrove is such a special place, and the Highgrove shop sells amazing things on there. And as we know, the profit actually goes towards charity. So it's the King's Foundation, which was formed in 1986. Profits go towards educational and training, and it's all to do with this sort of sustainable world. But not to forget as well the charitable aspect and the whole ethos of the King's Foundation, and that's so important. This is not just something that's going up on the website and just being sold purely to go into someone's pocket. So I think, you know, all in all, I think everyone should have a look at the Highgrove website and see what's on for sale. I mean, there are lots of really lovely, I think pretty fairly priced products. And even more so, go and see the gardens. You know, as we know, King Charles is a keen environmentalist, and the gardens are fabulous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, before the break, we heard from Dave Bossy, an ardent Republican and Donald Trump supporter. But I'm now very keen to get a Democrat view. I'm joined now down the line by Nomiki Konst, who has been, in the past, a former commissioner at the Democrat National Committee, and of course their convention coming up in a few weeks' time. Nomiki, thank you. Welcome to the programme. It would appear now with Chuck Schumer, with Barack Obama, now expressing pretty serious doubts. I mean, Biden, let's face it, Biden is not going to be the nominee, is he?
I mean, there's definitely fast reporting coming in, and I think up until this point, it's mostly been leaks, people who have agendas, folks who, you know, listen, campaigns are expensive, and there are consultants who make money on these campaigns, so there are factions who want to have their folks in, and other factions see, you know, opportunity with Joe Biden weakening, and of course with COVID, but I think COVID really was the marker here. I mean, you saw in the hours before he announced he had COVID in this BET interview that he would reconsider if health was a considering factor. And of course, with former President Barack Obama saying maybe we should relook at this, this changes the ball game. Moving forward, though, I'm a little concerned because the polling is tight across the board. It's within margins of error across many swing states, even in the Rust Belt. And this is with the RNC bump. I mean, every time there is a convention, you'll see a bump by the party that's holding the convention. So I do think it's not as alarming as people feel, as the chattering class is making it out to be, but we do need to do something. We do need to freshen up this party. We do need to have real conversations about how we choose our presidential candidates moving forward. It's not like we didn't know that Joe Biden was 81 years old. I blame the Democratic National Committee just as much as I blame, the Biden administration for not stepping up.
And, you know, the gaffes keep coming, don't they? I mean, today, yet another extraordinary gaffe where he simply couldn't remember the name of his defence chief. Let's just watch Joe Biden in action earlier on today.
And so it's all about treating people with dignity. And it's about making sure that, look, I mean, for example, look at the heat I'm getting because I named the Secretary of Defense, a black man. I named Ketanji Brown. I mean, because of the people I've named.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the black guy, it's endless. It's embarrassing, not just for the Democrats, it's embarrassing for America on the world stage. So I'm going to run on the assumption that he's gone. Does it then have to be Kamala Harris, or what's the procedure going to be as the Democrats run up to their convention?
You know, there are rules that the Democratic National Committee is supposed to follow. They don't always do so, as we saw in 2016 with superdelegates and many other factors not reforming after the commission that I sat on that you mentioned. But with that being said, it is most likely going to be Vice President Kamala Harris. And, you know, I think that's why there was this period of looking at polls and getting organizations together and figuring out how campaign finances were going to flow. I mean, this is the Biden-Harris ticket, making sure that the delegates that supported Joe Biden are going to be given in a fair way to the vice president. And maybe that doesn't even need to be so, given that they are a ticket. There are a lot of considerations to play out here. Also, we have the Rules Committee meeting coming up. This is something that people aren't even considering, is they could potentially change some of the rules to this process right before the convention to make it play out much more smoothly. You know, do people want to have a fair convention? Do we want to have a lot of candidates going around the country in a short period of time, like the UK elections, you know, talking about ideas, showing these fresh faces, going to swing states, talking to different demographics? That would be fantastic for the party. But it also suits the party to have a smooth transition. This is not a good moment. I'm not sugarcoating this. Does Joe Biden have gas? Is he older? Of course. Is this a very grueling schedule? Has he been sick, over and over, a cold, COVID? Yes. But we have to face this ticket that, you're highlighting right now at the convention that is really softening Donald Trump in a way that I think many folks haven't seen. And with the J.D. Vance addition to the ticket, we're not quite sure what to expect. I think Kamala Harris will be the strongest opposition to the anti-women ticket that the Trump J.D. Vance platform is pushing out there. I think that she has the complete opposite agenda, the complete opposite platform. I think all Democratic candidates would potentially have the complete opposite platforms, but the Republicans have a real women problem. Their platform and their candidates are rolling us back 100 years. The fact that J.D. Vance says women shouldn't be able to divorce their husbands if their husbands are abusing them, I mean, that's ridiculous. To completely abolish all abortions in any way or form, that's ridiculous. I mean, we're really going back to a different era here.
I tell you what, Nomiki, between you and Dave Bossy, we're hearing the arguments that are going to play out over the course of the next few months, whoever the candidate's going to be for the Democrats. And thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now today at Blenheim Palace, a meeting, yes, a big get-together of the European political community. This, it will not surprise you to know, is something that doesn't exactly thrill me. Well, joining me to discuss this in the studio in London is Sir George Howarth, former Labour MP, and Baroness Jacqueline Foster, life peer and a former member for the Conservative Party of the European Parliament. So a lot of discussion, folks, today about doing a pact with Europe where they might take some of our cross-channel illegal migrants and we might send some back the other way. George Howarth, it seems to me that if Keir Starmer was to enter into this, we'd probably end up receiving more people under this deal than we'd send the other way.
Well, I don't know what the basis for you being able to say that is, Nigel, but I think everybody sensible would accept that we have to have sensible agreements with, first of all, France, because that is where most of them are coming from as the last port of call. And secondly, we have to have agreements with either bilaterally or by other means with the rest of Europe. And we've been saying that as a party for a long time. Yvette Cooper's been saying it. And I think that is the best way forward.
Well, we'll find out. And interestingly, Border Force took a boat back today. I'm going to come back to you on that in just a moment, because one of the things, George, one of the things that Starmer did say at Blenheim Palace is under no circumstances will Labour leave the European Convention on Human Rights and its associated court in Strasbourg. But what is interesting is overnight we get the news that Border Force picked up a Mayday call, picked up a group of migrants in the Channel and took them not back to Dover, but put them into Calais. Do you think this was a political decision? Could this be actually the way that we do solve the problem?
To be honest, Nigel, I'd be speculating if I was to say it was a political decision. However, I think the tone that Keir and Yvette Cooper have both set since the election is that we're not going to tolerate it. We're going to deal with the problem, whether it's within Europe or, as the announcement said today, in the sources of initial migration in the Middle East and Africa. And so I think the tone may have emboldened the Border Force to do what they did. But also, I think it's important that it also shows if we get cooperation with France, there is a real prospect that we can deal with this problem in a way that would be effective.
Interesting word, Jackie Foster. You know, at no point since 2018, when the boats started coming, first slowly and then rapidly after 2020, at no point during a Tory government were any migrants taken by boat back to France. Are Labour now beginning to beat you on this argument?
I wish I could say yes. And obviously it's early days, and congratulations to them. But the European Union, there's always a quid pro quo. And whatever they agree, I think the point you raised at the beginning about any deals that are done, would we then end up having to take in illegal immigrants from the rest of the European Union? From my point of view, that's a non-starter. I think in addition, Keir Starmer also said he was going to give them another 84 million. Well, we've already given France about £500 million of taxpayers' money, and they've done absolutely nothing, frankly, over the last couple of years. You raised the point about the boat that turned round today and took these illegal immigrants back to Calais. My question then would be, well, why haven't they been taking them back to Calais for the last 2 or 3 years? So I'd like an answer to that. I do wish them well. Your point on the ECHR, I think, is very valid. I think the ECHR, I think it's out of date. And in terms of the legislation that we did pass, and we really tried to get good legislation through over the last 2.5 years, and we were actually thwarted at every quarter, whether it was the Rwanda bill or whether it was the illegal immigration bill, by the opposition parties, frankly, to put safeguards in to try and get to the bottom of this. They've apparently now been pretty well ripped up. So I wish the Labour Party well. But this is not going to be, there's no quick fix in all of this. And obviously what we have in all of this is this great tragedy of people who basically are trafficked and those that lose their lives. And that's been one of our biggest points. We shouldn't be having people losing their lives. There are legal ways to get into the United Kingdom. And many people come into the United Kingdom legally. And they don't need to have their lives threatened. And we know this is all about gangs. We are part of Interpol. We're part of all of these bodies that are trying to stop this. Where will the Labour Party, where are they going to deport their illegal immigrants to? Because they've thrown Rwanda out, the baby out with the bathwater, yet there's other countries in the European Union looking for countries to send them to.
Hang on, Jackie. If Border Force start taking migrants back to France, they will stop paying they'll stop paying traffickers. George, I must ask you one other thing that's been raised. David Lammy seems particularly keen that we sign up close to, although he's not been explicit about joining, a European defence union. How on earth can we reinforce NATO, strengthen our relationship with NATO, and at the same time be prepared to take orders potentially from a separate command centre in Brussels? That's my big worry on defence.
Well, look, I mean, first of all, I think it is important that if you look at Ukraine, and you and I probably differ on this, but if you look at Ukraine, it is clear that we need European defence systems that thwart the territorial ambitions of Putin. And secondly, there are common security issues which need to be discussed. But, of course, NATO will always take precedence over everything else. So I don't have any worries on that part. David Lammy has proved in the period when he's been Shadow Foreign Secretary that he's a patriot, but also that he wants to make sure our relationships with the rest of the world, including on security, are properly founded and properly carried out.
All right. OK, well, Jackie, George sees no conflict here between being part of NATO and potentially tying up close to the European Defence Union. What do you say?
I think you've got to have a look. You have to have a look at the detail. I mean, you know and I know we were in the European Union in the Parliament for the same time, and there was always this push, wasn't there, to common foreign and security policy and defence. And of course, you know, we've got two nuclear powers, obviously with France and then obviously with the United Kingdom. Although France left NATO for a number of years and then came back, you know, NATO is the kingpin. And what's important is actually where you are, and it's who's going to be the next president of the United States, in my view. And of course, we do have a very good relationship, frankly, with the European Union. It's not just the EU, it's the whole of the ECAC, the 44 European countries. We are at one, but there's all sorts of manoeuvres and exercises that go on jointly, and there's fantastic cooperation. But what I want to see now is I want to see strong leadership in Europe, and I certainly want to see, and I hope you send in my very best wishes to our sister party, the Republicans, to Donald Trump, and I hope he is successful in the election later this year, because we need a really strong voice and a strong leader in North America and in the certainly in the USA.
Well, I'm not sure many of your Conservative colleagues would call the current Republicans a brother or sister party, but I'll find out more when I speak to delegates later on here today. We're going to take a break, but then we're going to come back and discuss the fact that the government failed its citizens on COVID by planning for the wrong pandemic. Was the management of the whole thing a disaster from start to finish?
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. There could be some heavy, possibly even thundery rain this weekend, but before then, a lot of fine and hot weather around. That being said, there is a weather system affecting parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland through the end of today, bringing a bit more cloud and some outbreaks of rain here, though the rain will be easing overnight, so turning mostly dry. Meanwhile, across the bulk of England and Wales, it's a dry night with largely clear skies, albeit a few pockets of fog. A bit more cloud perhaps towards western parts. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount, a bit difficult for sleeping for some of us, some places holding up in the high teens Celsius, though a little bit cooler towards the northwest. And then tomorrow, it is going to be a hot day for many of us, particularly in the south. And starting off looking first thing, a fine picture, lots of sunshine through the morning. And once the sun comes up, those temperatures will quickly start to rise. A bit further north, it's looking cloudier, not as cloudy as today. And there may be a bit of rain around over higher ground, but on the whole, it's a dry start to the day as well. There may even be some sunshine breaking through, particularly towards the Moray coast and northern parts of Aberdeenshire as well. But as we go through the day, I'm expecting a bit of rain to start to push its way in towards the Outer Hebrides and some blustery winds developing here. Elsewhere, largely dry, one or two showers perhaps, but the general theme will be that there's plenty of sunshine around, especially across England and Wales. And with that, even hotter than today, temperatures rising into the low 30s Celsius towards the southeast and the mid to high 20s across many other areas. Some further wet weather then is going to push its way in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland as we go into Saturday. Perhaps some of that rain reaching into western parts of England and Wales as well. Further east, it's staying drier, and here we should still have some hot weather for a time, but there is the potential for some thunderstorms to develop on Saturday night. Then Sunday's looking a bit changeable, with things turning cooler by next week.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said stump.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
How are you? Pinch to your left, Mr. Farage, just a little bit to your left.
So Baroness Heather Hallett is conducting the COVID inquiry. It's going on endlessly. It'll go on for another couple of years. But we have today got one of the first reports, a 217-page report, which says the UK government and the civil service failed in pandemic preparedness. There were significant flaws, including lack of scalable test, trace and isolate systems. In fact, the whole report describes the whole thing as a complete catalogue of failure in terms of planning and preparation. At this stage, they haven't gone into vaccines, harms, arguments around that, some of which may be true, many of which may not be true. But in terms of us being ready for something, I've got to ask you, Baroness Foster, what went wrong?
Well, I think there were a combination. Hindsight's easy. And we can all turn around and say, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? I mean, my first question would be why the Chinese government actually, or the Chinese authorities, covered up the fact that COVID was rife going back to probably 4 or 5 months earlier, when they were temperature testing in airports. Now, I'm not saying that it would have all worked out fine if we'd known 3 or 4 months early, because it wouldn't necessarily, because this was something that was a real unknown. And so I think it's good that we're having an inquiry, don't get me wrong. But the time that's taking for this inquiry, I find absolutely astonishing. And this is only the first module. And this inquiry is costing 300 and whatever million. And of course we need to get to the bottom of it. And it's quite true, not just the UK, but I think a number of other countries, when they're planning for a pandemic, nobody planned for something like COVID-19. The closest we'd seen was SARS back in 2004, and that was a cover-up also by the Chinese before they told the WHO. And fortunately, it didn't spread as far into Europe, but some of those countries outside of Europe were pretty well prepared because they'd actually been in a situation dealing with something like this, but nobody knew what the implications were of COVID-19. In terms of her report, I noticed that she mentions the civil servants and she mentions government ministers. What she doesn't seem to mention here is the role that was played by the medical profession and SAGE, which was the group we heard talk about, 10 groups of people in SAGE, over 300 scientists and medics that covered all aspects of health. And yet there doesn't seem to be, I'm not sure if they're going to have any criticism, but they were making decisions that were never even able to be challenged. I mean, we had Professor Carl Hennigan. We set up an all-party group on pandemic recovery, basically, or response. And we heard all sorts of people, from journalists, from medics, from people from Stanford, who actually took a different point of view at how we should actually deal with this. And they were never allowed to be heard. And there were those of us, I think you know, Nigel, going back a couple of years, I went into the Lords 3.5 years ago, and we were standing up challenging the lockdowns and the effect on children. And it was as though we were just sort of talking to a wall. But notwithstanding that, the government, any government of the day, is going to be subject to the advice of the experts.
It was impossible to have any rational debate of any kind at all. If we didn't go along with the government line, we were all conspiracy theories and cranks. But George Howarth, you know, it's very easy, isn't it, to back trade. It's very easy to say the government should have been ready for this pandemic. But what's really important is, will the Labour Party learn any of the lessons that are coming out of these reports? Would we be better prepared if something like this hove into view in a year or two's time?
Well, I think it's important to say two things. The first one is that we weren't prepared, and that was fairly obvious at the time. Local authorities were having to take up the slack in Knowsley. They were having to provide protective equipment. They were having to provide food for the families that were shielding and vulnerable. And it wasn't working, and people knew it at the time, and the same applied, which will come out later, to the vaccination programme. So they weren't properly prepared. And yes, we should have known what happened in China. We should have learned from SARS. And yet what we were prepared for was a flu epidemic rather than a SARS-type, COVID-type epidemic. So one final point I would make that comes out in the report is that 40% of the public health budget in this country had been cut before that happened. And that was part of the reason why we were unprepared, because the public health infrastructure wasn't in place to deal with it.
No, it's funny, isn't it? The more money we put into the NHS overall, the more each department seems to feel it's got less. We'll come back to both of you in a moment. We're going to take a break, and after that, there are plenty of British visitors here. One of them is former Prime Minister Liz Truss. I'm going to ask her about her trip. Also ask why she was so angry at the King's speech. And we'll have a look at the Financial Conduct Authority saying politicians are being treated badly by the banks. Gosh, who knew? All of that in a couple of minutes.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
No one wants their child to be a fussy eater. But what is the secret to expanding your child's culinary horizons?
Is there a way to get kids away from the kids' menu, the fish fingers, the chips? Joining us now is the UK's top-selling author of children's cookery books, Annabelle Carmel. Good morning, Annabelle.
Thank you. So lovely to be here.
So, first of all, what's the issue with kids just having the traditional easy meals like fish fingers, you know, chips, beans?
It really depends if they've got preservatives in them, if they're full of salt. So I like to make them myself, and it's really easy. So I make my own chicken glazed nuggets, and super easy to make using proper pieces of chicken. You can cook them in the air fryer now, which is absolutely brilliant, so you need to fry them. And I think that it's really important that children grow up loving good food, because they make their minds up by the age of 5 what they like and what they don't like. And it's quite difficult to change their minds after that. But it's good to know that fussy eating is genetic. It's not to do with your cooking.
Oh,
that's not to say that you can't do something about it. So I've written many, many books, and I have an app with 1,000 recipes on it, and a lot of how to make your own junk food, how to make your own isolis out of fresh fruit.
Yes.
How to make your own pizzas. I make the most amazing homemade pizza. I actually brought you some cookies here.
So these are your books here. So my first cookbook, that's for how old children?
That's from the age of 1.
OK, and you've got a weaning one at the end, the baby one?
Yes, that's my very first book. I lost my first child. It was really sad. She died at the age of 3 months. And my second child was the world's worst eater. And I wrote that book as my legacy to Natasha, never thinking that it would start a whole career.
Oh, bless you.
It sold millions of copies, and it's so popular.
Is it quite pivotal and important that you introduce kids to the weaning stage, or, you know, how important?
It's very important, because the processed weaning food in pouches or jars, it's heated, so a lot of the vitamins aren't there anymore, so making your own is so easy and much cheaper.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan.
GB News royalty with
your perfect start to the weekend.
Lucky us.
Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, there was a time not so long ago when the only British political figure that would dare be seen anywhere near a Republican convention, and one with Donald Trump featuring in it, or a Trump rally, was me. But things have changed. Boris Johnson even popped in earlier in the week. And here, of course, joining me now is Liz Truss. Liz, what's brought you to the RNC?
I want Trump to win the election. I think it's vital. I think
the West is in serious danger. I think Biden has been an incredibly weak president. We've seen the war in Ukraine, the attack on Israel, China strengthened. And unless we do something about it, unless we Conservatives go and support Donald Trump and make it clear that we need him in the White House for the future, not just of America, but the future of the free world, we are in serious, serious trouble.
Well, I mean, these are sentiments that I've expressed many times over these recent years. But we have a Labour government. We have a Foreign Secretary who said very disobliging things about Trump. We have a Prime Minister who said not quite as rude, but fairly disobliging things about Trump. We're in a world that is facing perhaps the greatest potential of war in 60 years or more. Do you think Labour can form a relationship with a Trump administration if he wins?
I think they're going to have to. That is the reality of the situation. And I do believe Trump will win. I think people are realising, particularly after the assassination attempt, and Trump's strength in responding to that, the fighting spirit. And I've been here for 4 days at the convention. I've seen the reaction to President Trump, and his strength really, really comes across. And that is what people want. It's what people want, not just in America, but also in Britain.
Yeah.
They really want a sense that we are prepared to fight for our values, that we're prepared to fight for freedom, for democracy, for our sovereignty, for things that we believe in. And they're fed up of the left-wing wokery, the human rights culture that's actually damaged our countries. I mean, ironically, we've got a Labouring government in Britain just when people are turning against those ideas across the West.
Well, that might have something to do with the failure of the Conservatives to deliver on promises since the last election. But we won't go there right now. I was at the King's speech yesterday. You were mentioned, your government was mentioned. You've objected quite fiercely to what was said.
Well, it was absolutely outrageous. This was an official document prepared by civil servants on gov.uk that launched a political attack on me and a personal attack on me. Now, those attacks are wrong. What happened in October 2022 was largely down to failures of the Bank of England to regulate the pensions industry. But worse than that, we have so-called impartial civil servants putting political attacks in a government document. And what has happened is I've complained to the Cabinet Secretary. He has had that removed from the website. But there's nothing yet about pulping all the documents that have been put out, impugning my name and the name of my government.
So it's a partial victory. You've won a partial victory, in a sense.
Yes,
but
that
not,
is true.
But not as far as you'd like.
There's a clear acknowledgement that it was wrong. It's been removed. But I want to know, because this document will have been seen at the highest levels in the civil service, I want to know who signed this off. Who signed off these personal attacks on me, these untruths?
Are you saying the civil service aren't neutral?
I am saying that. And I'm very, very worried. We have Sue Gray, who was a former leading civil servant, now as Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. We have numerous former civil servants that have come out in favour of the Labour Party. And I'm very concerned that we don't have an impartial civil service anymore. We have people that share left-wing groupthink. And what does that mean? What does that mean for our democracy, Nigel?
Well, it's something we haven't. It's something we haven't debated enough, and I wonder whether the Labour government will face similar problems. We will see.
Well, they won't face similar problems
because of the left-wing bias.
Because the groupthink is on their side, and this is exactly what this wording in the King's Speech document shows. Shows that there are people within the civil service that share the political outlook of the Labour Party and aren't remotely ashamed.
I will get Sir George Howarth's view on that in just a moment. But finally, Liz, a report out today from the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, saying that many political figures or politically exposed persons, and there's about 90,000 of us, because it isn't just us, it's relations, it's kids, it's parents, it's all sorts of people, have been unfairly treated by the banking system, and that something needs to be done. Now, I did a lot to raise this issue last year. I had a lot of promises that came from Conservative ministers, from the FCA previously. Nothing has changed. Will it ever change?
It won't change until we change the system. The problem is that what has happened, particularly since Tony Blair got into power in 1997, is more decision-making and power has been outsourced from elected politicians. Elected politicians have become under more and more attack and constraints, and the banking system is part of that, and I've had the same issues trying to get
Was it
bank
a
accounts.
Monzo account, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I've had the same issues as you, not as severe as you had. I've not FOI'd it, so I don't know what crap they said about me. But you know, I've had issues myself. And you think we have an unelected bureaucracy with huge power, organisations like the FCA, organisations like the Treasury. They're not accountable. No one knows exactly how they operate. Meanwhile, elected politicians are the people on the front line getting the flak. And I do not think that is good for democracy. And I think things need to change.
Liz Truss, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Big speech tonight. What are you expecting?
Well, I'm expecting fireworks. I was there last night for J.D. Vance's speech. It was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. And the buzz and the energy at this convention is incredible. And I really believe the Conservatives, the Republicans are back in America. And what we need to make sure is they get back in Britain next.
Well, there are different ways of doing that, different points of view on that, but Liz Truss, thank you. It's going to be, later on, it's going to be fascinating, and we'll see what kind of Donald Trump we get. As I say, I expect him to be a lot more reflective and probably a lot more emotional than we've ever seen him before. If you've been through a near-death experience within the last few days, it has to have an impact of some kind. Now, getting back to the studio in London, Sir George Howarth, Liz Truss there, says that the civil service has pretty much given up any pretence at neutrality at all. It is pretty much infected from top to bottom with left-wing ideas, and it's not ashamed to show those opinions. What would you say to that?
I think it's nonsense. The problem Liz has got, and it won't have escaped the attention of people watching, is that she's not prepared to accept any responsibility for what happened when she was the Prime Minister and her government crashed the economy. And she's just lashing out at anybody, including the civil service, so that she herself can evade responsibility. Quite frankly, she needs to take a long, hard look at what she did when she was the Prime Minister and start to accept some responsibility for it.
If Joe Biden steps aside this week, that there will be enough.
Well, I'd say this to you, George. I mean, even if we went beyond the civil service, let's take, for example, teaching, whether it's secondary education or university education. There has been a significant increase in the influence of the left over all of our public institutions.
Well, you know, I think whether it's the left or whether it's because there's a really strong sense in the public sector that they've been unfairly treated, where incomes have been slashed, where respect has been withdrawn, they've been attacked publicly. And so I don't excuse it, but I understand why people feel really annoyed with the previous government and feel disrespected. So it's not some kind of deep state thing. It's how you treat people. If you treat them with respect, if you make sure that they're paid properly, then they will, in their turn, respect the institutions that they are governed by.
Well, George, I hear what you say. Jackie Foster, I think there's something in what Liz Truss says. I think there has been a march of the left through all of our institutions.
I wholly agree with Liz Truss, actually. And I also saw it when I was in the European Parliament with the permanent representation. And we saw it, we really saw it when the referendum result came out on Brexit. And it was astonishing, actually. It was as though somebody lived on another planet and it hadn't happened. And the terrible non-acceptance of the will of the people when we had that referendum. And it was throughout all the departments in Whitehall, and you know that, and I know that. So I think Liz is right to a degree. It's a great shame, because we do have some brilliant civil servants, and we know we'll have friends who have worked with great people in there. But it is about leadership, and I think the Sue Gray issue that you raised, I don't think that was something to be very proud of, really. Yeah. Because, you know, you're talking about a very influential person at the heart of Downing Street, and then everything that sort of, you know, flew from there. So, you know, I just hope now it all gets back together again. It's very important for us in the United Kingdom. But I think Liz was right. And she was also right on the Bank of England. And I said that a long time ago. Liz Truss didn't crash the economy on her own. Nobody crashes the economy on their own. We knew that the Fed were looking at interest rates. We knew that the Bank of England kept the interest rates low for far too long when the economies were changing. We know that the energy price cap was what was causing problems within the markets because they didn't know what the prices would be.
There was also something here about the way in which the pensions industry was being regulated, forced to put too much money into gilts and having to punt with the rest. But that's another story. Final thought,
well, you're
if
the
I can,
banker.
George
You know
Howard.
more about. You know
it's
more
going to
about
be the big
this than
stage
me.
tonight behind me for Donald Trump, and I don't know what's going to happen. I doubt Biden will go through as the nominee. Can the Labour government, can David Lammy and Keir Starmer, can they work with a Trump administration in your view?
Yes. I think the bald facts of the situation are that it's not for the UK government or any other government to decide who should be the President of the United States. Ultimately, that's the decision of the American people themselves. Whoever the American people choose, then the UK government will work with them. And I know that David Lammy has been over in the United States on many occasions.
Well, George, I hope you're right, because it's in the interest of both of us. And we'll be back live tomorrow with you.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. There could be some heavy, possibly even thundery rain this weekend, but before then, a lot of fine and hot weather around. That being said, there is a weather system affecting parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland through the end of today, bringing a bit more cloud and some outbreaks of rain here, though the rain will be easing overnight, so turning mostly dry. Meanwhile, across the bulk of England and Wales, it's a dry night with largely clear skies, albeit a few pockets of fog. A bit more cloud perhaps towards western parts. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount, a bit difficult for sleeping for some of us, some places holding up in the high teens Celsius, though a little bit cooler towards the northwest. And then tomorrow, it is going to be a hot day for many of us, particularly in the south. And starting off looking first thing, a fine picture, lots of sunshine through the morning. And once the sun comes up, those temperatures will quickly start to rise. A bit further north, it's looking cloudier, not as cloudy as today. And there may be a bit of rain around over higher ground, but on the whole, it's a dry start to the day as well. There may even be some sunshine breaking through, particularly towards the Moray coast and northern parts of Aberdeenshire as well. But as we go through the day, I'm expecting a bit of rain to start to push its way in towards the Outer Hebrides and some blustery winds developing here. Elsewhere, largely dry, one or two showers perhaps, but the general theme will be that there's plenty of sunshine around, especially across England and Wales. And with that, even hotter than today, temperatures rising into the low 30s Celsius towards the southeast and the mid to high 20s across many other areas. Some further wet weather then is going to push its way in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland as we go into Saturday. Perhaps some of that rain reaching into western parts of England and Wales as well. Further east, it's staying drier, and here we should still have some hot weather for a time, but there is the potential for some thunderstorms to develop on Saturday night. Then Sunday's looking a bit changeable, with things turning cooler by next week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our summer treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest cash prize of the year so far. With an extra £30,000 in your bank account this year, you could take the ultimate financial holiday and send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could get you those nagging home improvements done, buy that brand new car, or just enable you to kick back and relax for the rest of the year. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch.